Resident Evil franchise has been a guest of remakes of its old works for several years, and this trend continues with the restoration of the fourth version. But will the continuation of this process benefit franchisee? Have the remakes had a negative impact on the series in the last few years? Today, we want to analyze these works and their effects on Resident Evil performance. First of all, it's best to look at how to make the second version come true. Fans of the series wanted the second version to be remake following the extraordinary remake of franchisee's original version and its release in 2002. Capcom did not respond to these requests for a long time, and Resident Evil has entered its new phase and undergoes many changes. Over the course of about 16 years of begging and asking fans of Capcom to make the second edition remake, we've seen Invader Studio work to build the restored version of Resident Evil 2. The studio even released a few minutes demo of its prototype Resident Evil 2 Reborn, which really looked great during that period, but unfortunately Capcom stopped the project and eventually it became the first example to Daymare 1998. After 2 decades of requests from fans, Capcom announced that it was building a remake version of Resident Evil 2, and the game was finally introduced during the E3 2018 ceremony and came into the hands of fans a few months later. The feedback to this remake was fantastic and a lot of fans enjoyed it, and I think Resident Evil 2 Remake was really a turning point for the current franchise phase. At the time, this remake was considered a special work that was the result of years of effort and begging from the Resident Evil community, and for this reason, it was of great value to all fans. After the terrific success of the work, Capcom decided to remake the third version, and within just 1 year, the third game was released. This version was criticized by many fans because Capcom did not manage its development process well and, unlike Resident Evil 2 Remake, tried to publish it as quickly as possible. Also, the construction of the Resident Evil Resistance Online project, along with the restoration of the third version, put a lot of pressure on the creators, and finally an incomplete game was delivered to fans. While the title can continue to be an enjoyable experience for old franchise fans, it does not meet the standards of a remake at all. Many story content and even gaming environments have been completely eliminated, making it a very short experience and sparking outrage among many fans. In addition to these issues, this remake did not work so favorably in Nemesis's remake and appearance design, and failed to convey the magic of the character's past to its modern example, merely placing a soulless 3D character in front of the player, which after a while his structure became repetitive and more of a disturbing factor. But now with the fourth version, it seems that again Capcom is trying to give fans an intriguing remake and make up for its earlier mistakes. This version can be like a remake of the second game, an influential and extraordinary work in franchises, but what then? Does it still need to rebuild other versions of franchises? If Capcom changes this trend, will it benefit the series? Let's take a look at the current franchise problems and examine the role of these restored works. From 2000 to the end of 2015, we've seen 7 original games and about 15 sub-releases of the Resident Evil series. However, in the last 5 years, remake versions have generally replaced subversions, and during this time we have only seen the release of a subversion, Resident Evil Resistance. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest problems that franchise is currently struggling with. It is true that remake versions are new experiences, but in the end, they tell a recurring story in a new format, so they cannot be referred to as completely new versions. On the other hand, this franchise is also grappling with another crisis, and it is also limited to some characters in the original versions and the inability to use other old and big characters, and this problem stems from the absence of subversions. Characters such as Leon did not show up in any other game after the 6th edition, and over the past decade we have only seen Vendetta Animation continue with his story, which was a very weak and irrational work. In addition to Leon, Jill Valentine's character has also been in absence for more than a decade, with many fans requesting her return to the series. The fact is that the originals are currently pursuing a coherent and grounded story, and therefore there are limitations on restoring old characters in the originals unless Capcom wants to go a completely different way in the 9th edition. In the past, Capcom used subversions to some extent try to strike a balance between the presence of popular franchise characters and continue their story, an issue that is not possible today due to the presence of remakes. Works such as the 2 versions of Revelations played a major role in restoring some of franchising's most popular and oldest characters. Characters such as Claire Redfield, Jill Valentine, and especially Barry Burton all had the opportunity to appear at franchises again after many years, offering fans and Resident Evil experiences in the form of these 2 works. Also, the 2 versions of Resident Evil Chronicles, although they were light gun shooter titles but told completely fresh stories alongside old stories, allowed us to take on the role of Albert Wesker or experience Operation Javier closely, which brings Jack Krauser back on the scene. In addition, There were other works such as Resident Evil Survivor, which introduced entirely new characters such as Ark Thompson and generally produced a great variety of franchises. In the last 5 years, Capcom has been busy making remakes, and we have no longer seen subversions released. For years, rumors of the construction of Resident Evil Revelations 3 have been going hand in hand with password outrage and the presence of Rebecca Chambers, but in the latest reports it was mentioned to cancel. On the other hand, for a while, rumors of a proprietary version based on Hunk's character were heard, but there was no news of it anymore. The character has repeatedly appeared in the prototype of some versions, including Revelations, but was eventually removed altogether due to fundamental changes in the story. He was also present in the first trailer for this version. I think this character has a great potential to get a dedicated game, but as it seems, Capcom is not going to stop making remakes. In general, the existence of remakes causes Capcom not to go into creating sub-versions with new stories, and this is a big problem that is directly related to the crisis of franchise exclusiveness with some characters. Re-Engine is a fantastic graphics engine and can bring extraordinary experiences. Just imagine how attractive a third-person subversion with characters like Claire, Jill or even Hunk can be. Remakes in the long run reduce innovation and new ideas because they all have a pre-established and distinctive structure, and as I said, even though they are different experiences, they are still not new games and ideas. After Capcom came up with the second version of the Resident Evil, many companies began to think about rebuilding their old games, as they were easier to build than to develop a whole new work, and this is partly true for Capcom. In the previous section, we talked a little bit about the impact of subversions on franchises. Making subversions requires new ideas, and also because of lore and franchises' incredibly extensive narrative backgrounds, it is needed to create a logical and consistent story. I think this phase of Resident Evil needs subtitles more than any time else in franchise history. Capcom could best proceed with the story of the original versions with Chris in the subversions in parallel with it and deal with various other characters and operations. We're already seeing a one-dimensional trend in franchises that only flows in original versions, and other than that, franchises have lost their vibrancy compared to the past. On the other hand, started the third edition of a new generation of franchise multiplayer games. Resident Evil Resistance was released as a bundle with Resident Evil 3 Remake and not only did not perform well but was also one of the factors of pressure on the manufacturer's team in the difficulties of developing the third version reconstruction. Also, the title Reverse is also set to be released along with Resident Evil Village extension packages, and according to my experience, it's probably not going to perform interestingly. All of this is resources, time and expenses that could have been spent on making sub-story driven. Remakes have made the creators sluggish because, along with the simplicity of the construction compared to the new versions, these titles will also sell very well and demand lighter marketing. These works are all proven titles and are of high value to franchise fans, so fans are much more easily encouraged to buy them, so the construction of these works is somewhat justified from the perspective of Capcom, but personally I feel that if this trend continues, we will be tired of seeing remakes. The task of remakes is to portray old and outdated works in the form of modern experiences, and if managed properly like the second version, it can be very much in the interests of franchisees and their fans, but like everything else, indulgence in this issue can also hit the process ahead of franchises. Resident Evil series was much more risky and flexible in the past, and so until 2017 apart from how it performed, we saw a very high variety among the titles in this series. Works with new and different stories that not only expanded lore franchises but also introduced new characters to players, but unfortunately in the last few years, as in the past, we have not seen such a trend in franchises. There are a number of Resident Evil fans who prefer to experience the works as they were originally, and are so-called a purist. This doesn't mean that these people don't enjoy remakes, but old games have a more special place at their heart. Although I am extremely excited for the fourth version and I am counting on that experience, I still believe that this version did not require a remake, and I mentioned it in my previous videos. Remake can improve a game and bring back its original ideas that have not been implemented in the original version for a variety of reasons, and this is highly expected according to Resident Evil 4 Remake, but in itself Resident Evil 4 remains the best available and cannot be referred to as an obsolete work. In my opinion, a version such as Resident Evil Code Veronica could have been a better candidate for the Remake Capcom project. But now we get to the question of whether making Remake after the fourth version is in franchise's best interests. As I said, Remake can have favorable results not only in this franchise, but also in other franchises, but it cannot be referred to as a completely positive approach. Rebuilding old versions of a franchise also brings problems that we talked about in previous sections about some of these problems in Resident Evil. Many of you may believe that Resident Evil Code Veronica deserves to receive a rebuild, and I agree with you completely. but the remake have lost a little weight and value, so I think it's best that Capcom focus a few years to advance the franchise more efficiently and address other characters in the current timeline, and after a few years again, go for the construction of remakes. 2018, and when Resident Evil 2 Remake was introduced, we really saw a symbolic moment in this franchise. What we've been waiting for years has finally come to happen. After that, the problems of the third version somewhat made the fan community, especially the old fans, pessimistic about the remakes because, unlike the second version, the remake was not developed with love, precision, and patience, and merely after the remake of the second game, Capcom intended to pocket more money before the glow around it went asleep. And it didn't give the constructive team enough time to complete their game. Hence, many even now are concerned that Capcom will again make this mistake in the development process of Resident Evil 4 Remake. Finally, the answer to the question we asked goes back somewhat to the audience as well as the success rate of the reconstruction of the fourth version. But besides, the problems derived from the successive construction of these restored works are quite clear. Personally, I miss seeing old characters and narrating new sub-stories, and I prefer Capcom to build a few subtitles after a good or bad remake of fourth version, and return some of the characters that fans have wanted to see for years. This can both help balance franchises in terms of content and allow creators to use other characters away from franchise's original storyline and its limitations. What do you think about this? Would you like to see sub-versions with fresh stories, or are you happy with the process of recreating old versions of franchises?